Okay, so in this first segment, we're going to talk a bit about the historical background of this period when the worship of Shiva and Vishnu really developed into what we can call popular or mainstream Hinduism. This is what's known as early India, and it can be said to fall roughly between the years 200 BC and 500 CE. Let's start at actually 185 BCE. That's a year when this Brahmin military general named Pushyamitra Shunga had overthrown the powerful Mauryan Empire. Now, we saw last time the Mauryans had been the first large scale empire in ancient India. This military overthrow by Pushyamitra Shunga created a political flux that would last for almost 500 years until another group of empire builders, called the Guptas, successfully built up a new empire from the east around the year 300 CE. In that old Magadha territory, which used to be the home of the base of the Mauryans, Pushyamitra, once he knocked them over, founded his own dynasty called the Shungas. But the Shungas weren't quite as strong as the Mauryans, and so different regional states also got to be powerful at this time. There were the Satavahanas down south in the Deccan, the Bactrians or the Indo-Greeks in the northwest, the Cholas and Cheras and Pandyans in the deep south. By the start of the Common Era, Central Asian rulers also came and set up kingdoms in India. These were the Kushanas, they were called the Weiju in China, the Shakas, the Scythians, as they were called in Europe, and the Persians. Now, if you remember, Buddhism had grown to be a kind of state religion for the Mauryan king Ashoka, while that old Vedic ritual industry of sacrifice had to take a kind of back seat. After the Mauryan Empire fell, though, Brahmins seem to have kind of revived that old Vedic ritual tradition and upgraded it to now gain new relevance for these new political units in this imperialized world. As part of this revival, the two great Sanskrit epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, both kind of seem to be about a golden age, way back before the Mauryans, before Buddhism and Jainism and all that stuff, when the kings did massive Vedic rituals and life was good. Eventually, around 300 CE, a new group of rulers, these Guptas, cobbled together an empire that was a bit different actually from that old Mauryan empire. It looked like it, but it was different now. Instead of military force, the Guptas secured their power mainly through marriage alliances, by controlling trade routes, and giving large donations and land grants to temples and monasteries among the Buddhists, Hindus, and Jains. Most strikingly, they sponsored a sophisticated courtly culture of the arts, like poetry, drama, dance. Then all of these were expressed in the elite language of Sanskrit. The Gupta Empire would eventually fall apart around the year 550 when the Huns attacked from the northwest. But the elite Sanskrit courtly culture that they promoted would actually thrive in India long after they were gone, for another 1,000 years. Now, what was going on in religious life during this time of political change? Classical Hindu thought at this time consisted of two distinct lifestyles, one which we can call pravritti, worldly engagement, versus nivritti, or renunciation. This is basically the same as that ritualist versus renouncer divide that we saw in the Upanishads. The pravritti strand was that old Vedic ritual tradition, which said that each person should follow their rules of living according to their caste and their life stage, their varnashrama dharma, and that everyone should do all the rituals that you're supposed to do. This orthodox Brahmanical Vedic religion basically carried on as it ever does, and even as you can find it today. The renunciant strand of Hinduism, which was born in the Upanishads, continued to grow and develop in this early time period as well. Two philosophical schools became especially strong in the post-Mauryan age, Sankhya and Yoga, and we'll actually see their impact on the Bhagavad Gita at the end of our journey. Outside of the Hindu sphere, the heterodox or Shramana religions also were growing stronger. Jainism and Buddhism at this time both attracted more and more lay followers who sponsored a rich artistic and architectural tradition in which we start to see really ornate temples and carvings and monasteries and shrines that were built up all across the subcontinent, starting around 200 to 100 BC, it seems like. Now, right alongside these older religious traditions, we now see the rapid and kind of remarkable rise of a very new kind of worship that you can call popular, or what we're going to call theistic Hinduism. The focus is now on direct devotional worship of a particular god, and in Sanskrit, this devotional spirit is called bhakti. The bhakti tradition mainly focused on two major gods, Shiva and Vishnu, who were minor figures, remember, in the old Vedic religion. And also, we start to see the active worship of many different manifestations of the goddess, or Devi, and lots of other gods and goddesses as well, large and small. This is the kind of worship that you see all over the place, even today in mainstream Hinduism. We can call it bhakti. In English, we'll be kind of calling it theistic, right, since it's focused on the gods. The idea is basic. It's pretty simple. God or the goddess can help you with your problems that you have in this world. They can also help to liberate you from the cycle of karma and from rebirth, from samsara. The only trick is that you have to be fully devoted to him or her. Bhakti allowed you to have a merger of both of those strains of religion, ritualists and renunciants, both pravritti and nivritti. It also allowed Hinduism to start to look a lot like Jainism and Buddhism, where you have a renunciant community and lay householders. So now Hindu householders could give donations to temples, they could sponsor great works of architecture, art, literature, learning, not just Vedic sacrifices in those temporary structures that were burned at the end. So all in all, it seems that this period between 200 BC to 500 CE was the time period when this religious marketplace really took off in India, and it hasn't stopped ever since. Now, just like I mentioned, the popular bhakti tradition involved worshipping one of the major gods of your choosing in a fully devoted way. Let's take a closer look at what I'm talking about. There's a kind of trinity concept in Hinduism known in Sanskrit as the Trimurti, which involves seeing three gods as working together to kind of keep the whole universe going. This is Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and they're described as creating the universe, destroying the universe, and sustaining it. Brahma was thought of as the grandfather of all the gods. He comes also to be identified as Prajapati, that old Vedic god of creation, also as Purusha, that cosmic man who'd been cut up and sacrificed to create the whole universe. Brahma isn't usually directly worshipped for any specific bhakti purposes, and generally his role is to kind of help solve problems that arise between gods and sages. He's kind of like an arbiter or judge rather than directly answering our prayers. Shiva is identified as the Vedic Rudra, that healing but fearsome and destructive Vedic god who is denied a share of the sacrifice, but he's still to be given leftovers to keep him happy. Shiva is the source of all transcendent spiritual force who's going to give his devotees the absolute power to do anything they want in the world. Vishnu was also a marginal Vedic deity, if you remember. He was Indra's younger brother, and that's kind of it. He took those 3 steps. In this new popular Hinduism, Vishnu is now the principal sustainer of the entire world, the cosmos, the one god who intervenes whenever dharma is in trouble, whenever duty, the law is in trouble, and whenever forces of chaos threaten the good people on earth. Shiva and Vishnu were the principal targets of devotion. But many other gods also received bhakti, like the elephant-headed Ganesha, Surya, the sun. There are also all kinds of manifestations of the goddess, Uma, Kali, Durga, Lakshmi, etc., etc. Again, the idea was that you go to these gods or goddesses directly, right, without a Vedic fire, without special mantras, and you get their blessings to help you solve problems in your life. Or to gain liberation. To do that, you need a place to go, right? To see the god or the goddess. You need priests who are going to help you do it. And you need a physical object of worship. you need something to look at. So that's why we see the development of permanent Hindu temples during this time period, where statues were located in which the god or goddess was permanently installed, or at least it was installed as long as the temple remained sanctified. These statues were called murtis, and they could be either iconic or aniconic. That is, they could have a human shape, or it could be symbolic in their shape. And they had a sacred value only if they were properly consecrated. Now, once you visit the god or goddess, how are you supposed to worship them in bhakti? This act of worship is called a puja. Pujas are usually vegetarian offerings of fruit or flowers or dairy products or other auspicious things that are given to the deity. Besides puja offerings, there's also other various hospitality rituals that you do at temples every day to honor the gods. The god or goddess is bathed, dressed, fed, saluted, sung to, praised, told stories to, and generally revered by his or her devotees. In return for these honors, this reverence, the god or goddess bestows their prasada, or grace that's given back to the devotee. This prasada is usually in the form of a sweet or a piece of fruit or coconut, something like that, that the devotee takes away from the temple or from the ceremony. The idea is that it's going to contain a little sliver of that deity's infinite sacred power. This little nugget of power is hopefully going to help the devotee gain either worldly success, which is called bhukti, or ultimate liberation, which is called mukti, depending on what you're looking for. This whole process and the emotion and the spirit that's involved gets to be called bhakti. And at its root, bhakti means to share in something, to belong to something bigger, to become part of God. And it comes to be the dominant idiom of Hindu worship, and it still serves as its central core even today. If you ever get to observe any kind of Hindu ritual at a temple, at a home, even on the streets of India, chances are you'll see devotees filled with a kind of intense emotional fervor of connecting and being part of the divine. This bhakti spirit served to create real and meaningful social communities in early India that were distinct from the normative Brahminical caste system. Bhakti communities formed around gods that were worshipped. So Vishnu worshippers were known as Vaishnavas. Shiva worshippers were Shaivas. Goddess worshippers were Shaktas. Caste wasn't obliterated usually, so one could be a Shaiva Brahmin or a Vaishnava Brahmin, or a Shaiva Kshatriya, Vaishnava Vaishya, and so on and so forth. Anyway, so there you have it, the lay of the land in that time period that we can call early India, which was a time of great political flux and change, when we saw the rise of this popular theistic Hinduism. Let's take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to take a closer look at one strand of this bhakti tradition, the devotional worship of Shiva, the great yogi, the master of all lords, the lord over creatures, the ultimate source of sacred power. So stay tuned.